All right, guys, we've now got a 5x to 1 SPR, and we've got a condensed in position range with traps still. So again, still same one, aces, jacks through sevens, and then linear out of position range, aces through fours. What's different? 5 to 1 SPR, right? 5 to 1 SPR. So I want you guys to think about what you think. How does this change things for the out of position player having an uncapped in position range? What happens now, right? What happens now? What happens to bet sizing? What's the most commonly chosen bet sizing? So what we've seen is we saw that at a 1 to 1 SPR, jamming was like pretty much the kind of seized the day. At a 2 to 1 SPR, we saw that pot was still like one of the predominant bet sizings for extracting value. That 2x pot was too large against the range that had the nuts this often. So now that we've got a 5 to 1 SPR, what do you think? I think you go ahead and pause the video, write down your thoughts. Like what do you think the most commonly chosen bet sizing is? Does out of position get to jam? Does out of position check a lot? Or check all the time, or what? What do you think happens at a 5 to 1 SPR? Okay, so hopefully you paused the video, wrote down your thoughts. I haven't looked at this one yet, so I think that there's plenty of room for me to look silly. But what I think you're going to see is just how impactful it is that the in position player can have the nuts. There's definitely no jamming. Jamming is going to be like a real bad way to try to map and try to optimize your EV. That's actually just a very predictable math problem. So there are 6 combos in the in position player's range. One of those 6 combos is pocket aces. That's 17%, but I can just do this so that you can see that it's 17%, 16.67%, whatever. So what does that mean as a practical solution? Well, that means that if you jam for 5x pot, let's get another calculator up. If you jam for 5x pot, what happens? Well, you're jamming for 5x pot. You're jamming 5. Total pot's gonna be 6, right? Your 5 plus the 1. This is your risk reward for jamming. This is your opponent's full percentage. Okay, so let's subtract 1 from this really quickly to see their call percentage. Oh, look at that. Their call percentage is pocket aces. Pocket aces is a 16.67% fraction of the range. Pocket aces is exactly what they need to defend if you shove. So of course, if you shove pocket aces, what do you get? How much money do you make? You make 0. You make absolutely no money because you get called by exactly pocket aces. We can go ahead and illustrate that. But the shove won't work because if you shove pocket aces here, you'll get called by pocket aces here. That just does not work. Now, this is one of the really key insights to theory, which is that like if you have the nuts, you can actually destroy the EV of the hand. Because a lot of people, without theory, without this kind of like simplistic, really, it's not like I'm doing calculus or anything. I'm not smart enough to do elegant, complicated math. But with some basic math tools, you can see that you can actually destroy the EV of the nuts by shoving. And a lot of people who play no limit hold'em aren't familiar with that idea. They think that like if they have the nuts, they can jam. It's that it's a fine answer, that it's a fine solution. If I have the nuts, I can shove, and I have the nuts. It's fine. It's never bad to shove the nuts. I've heard so many like things that aren't true about no limit hold'em. It's hilarious. But in this way, if you jam pocket aces, what's the EV of pocket aces? It's 0, right? Think about that for a second. If you shove pocket aces here, well, it's not 0. I suppose it's not 0 because you'll still win all the times that they fold. You'll win the pot all the times that they fold. But the the incremental EV that you generate will be 0, right? And that's a very important insight. It completely destroys the EV of the hand because the nuts should make, as a hand, should make more money than what is in the middle. Okay, because your opponents would be calling with worse. But in this instance, they don't have to. So we can go ahead. We can see that we can we can automatically conclude that shoving is out. It's not even close. 2x pot's also out, in my opinion. And you're going to see potentially some even pot size getting challenged because being jammed on sucks by the in position player. So we'll go ahead and take a look now. Let's go ahead and take a quick look. There's jamming. It's not very good. There's 3x pot. It's not very good either. There's 2x pot. Oh my goodness me. Pot has come out as a bet sizing strategy. The way to optimize the EV for the out of position player is to bet half pot or 30% or 10%. Very small bet sizes. Okay. So what we're starting to see is that as SPRs deepen, bet sizing actually contracts if your opponent can have the nuts. Okay. So keep in mind that we've seen jamming for 5x pot before in our toy game journey together. We have seen jamming for 5x pot, right? It was when the out of position player had the nuts and the in position player didn't. But with the out of position player having the nuts and the in position player having the nuts and a 5x to 1 SPR, even with all of these advantages that the out of position player has around kings and queens, the bet sizing is still small. Okay. So the nuts has a very substantial impact, and you can only really appreciate this using toy games, in my opinion. Okay. Aces being allocated to multiple bet sizings. Kings and queens in this context really aren't the nuts anymore. I've mentioned this in the previous video. I said, like, as you get deeper and deeper, the distinction between the nuts and the hands that are just really good becomes sharper and sharper. Okay. So the nuts is behaving in a way that's been consistent throughout this video series, where it's betting half pot, it's betting 30%, it's betting 10%, it's betting, it's checking. And like a big part of that is if you bet 10% and get raised, then you can make this huge re-raise, right? If you bet half pot and get raised, or if you bet 30% and get raised, you can make this huge re-raise, right? And that works, right? That's a viable mechanism for growing the pot and winning a lot of money with pocket aces. Less so with pocket kings, right? Less so with pocket kings. So kings ends up with like a much sharper preference for betting half pot, which is just like a sizing choice that where it gets a lot of value, right? Same thing's true about pocket queens. Keep in mind that they're identical hands. Jacks and tens we're still seeing. So these are really strong hands in the range. Jacks and tens get a lot of value. Definitely can't check raise or bet 3-bet to any sizing choice. Really. So they just pure bets. Then we have our bluff catchers. So we still have our 4 buckets, right? This is the nuts with a sharp distinction between this hand and the second nuts. This is the second nuts. Very strong hands. Going to have some kind of characteristics that make it somewhat comparable to the nuts, but it's not the nuts. Jacks and tens certainly kind of fit the bill as like our top pair of hands that get a lot of value as bets, but definitely can't ever check raise, and certainly don't want to be like bet 3-betting or things like that. So they just pure bet. Bluff catchers and bluffs. Okay. Keep in mind that we're using smaller and smaller fractions of our bluffs because we are betting smaller. So because we are betting smaller sizing choices, our bluff to value ratio is shrinking, and we get fewer bluffs per value bet, and so like more of them just check and lose. Okay. So with that, I think we can go ahead and take a look at the in position strategy and kind of move on. All right, guys. So now we're doing in position versus bet strategy. And what we are going to focus on is just how large in position still gets to bet. So keep in mind that the in position player is not up against the same type of range that the out of position player had to deal with. The in position player's up against a range that is now quite weak, right? So just keep in mind always that we're dealing with the check component. So out of position check, the range is predominantly 9s, 8s, 7s. 6s, 5s, and 4s don't matter because 7s are bluff. The weakest hand in the in position range beats these hands, so don't worry about these ones. But the out of position player is checking mostly like 9s, 8s, and 7s, and then aces, kings, and queens a little bit. These hands a little bit, right? So of course, larger bet sizes make sense because you're up against a range that's much weaker. And so we still don't get to use 5x pot, even though 5x pot gets called by worse hands still. So even though if you bet to 5x pot here, you are getting called by worse hands. You are getting called by kings and queens still at a fraction. When you jam, you want to understand no limit hold'em as an opportunity cost game. Understand? So if it's an opportunity cost game, it doesn't matter that 5x pot is profitable. You get called by worse with pocket aces. You generate incremental EV because hands that aren't pocket aces are calling. That's true. Doesn't matter though, because what you're trying to do is pick the most lucrative bet sizing choice, and 3x pot just maximizes the EV. And so the natural question after that is like, how do I get more predictive? It's difficult, to be honest. But this whole exercise, this whole series is trying to help you get more predictive around what bet sizes should work, what bet sizes shouldn't work. And you're never going to get like perfect, of course, but the goal is to get better. And so like we can see, for example, here, our opponent does still have the nuts. We don't want to bet to 5x pot. Our opponent's range is not capped. So we are not betting to 5x pot. We've seen solutions where we do in fact bet to 5x pot. both for out of position and for in position. And in those solutions, the thing about those solutions was that aces and kings were asymmetric. They were the hands that we had that our opponent lacked, and we jammed under those conditions, even for 5x pot. Here, the fact that your opponent has the nuts still, 5x pot is out, both for in position and for out of position. Neither strategy really likes jamming. That's an important lesson. We've seen consistently that betting 10% or 30% of pot in position sucks. So we've seen that. That's another important lesson. So while we are not perfectly predictive, we are certainly very predictive about what not to do. Understand that's very important. It's very powerful. You might not know exactly what to do, but if you know exactly what not to do, if you know, for example, not to bet 10%, not to bet 30%, not to bet 5x pot because your opponent's uncapped. So not to bet too small in position, not to bet too big into it in an uncapped range. And you also understand to bluff at the bottom of your range. So you're bluffing with pocket sevens in this instance. You're not bluffing like some other hand for some nonsensical reason. So you're bluffing at the bottom of your range. And you're careful about betting into like an uncapped range at really deep SPRs. Okay, so that's the lesson for pocket jacks here, where it's mixing to check, right? If you're careful about betting into an uncapped range at really deep SPRs with thin value bets, you're well on your way to playing much better and using a theoretical framework to improve your decision making quite dramatically, without actually knowing exactly whether or not we're going to bet 3x pot more or 2x pot more, right? Like that's very difficult to nail down before you see a solution. But you can still play a hell of a lot better than people who don't do this type of work. And with that, we can move on to the versus bet strategy. All right, guys, we are now doing versus bet strategy for out of position. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick look here. And we'll go ahead and take a look at the 3x pot sizing first. That's the most, that's the sizing choice that aces chooses the most often. Even though half pot is very important sizing choice here. So we're gonna go ahead and look at those two. So keep in mind, so people, I know some people be like, even though we've explained this before, I think it's just gonna explain it every time. So I wanna make sure everybody gets it. So the risk reward is 3. We're betting 300, total pot's 400. We would expect a 75% fold, 25% defend. Oh my gosh, why is it 86? Oh, that's right, because 4s, 5s, and 6s don't beat bluffs. Okay, so 4s, 5s, and 6s don't beat 7s. So they don't count as a part of this calculation, okay? So just keep that in mind as we look at this. These hands that don't beat bluffs don't count. Okay, so from there, I think it's pretty standard. Fold a lot, raise with aces. Aces does in fact jam, which makes sense because the bet sizing is 3x pot, so it's the only real sizing choice you have available to you. If you're betting to 3x pot, it's just aces. It's choosing that sizing choice. So of course, kings, queens, 9s, and 8s beat bluffs, lose to value bets. The same hand, really. And the frequencies for taking these different given actions may differ, but the EV is the same. So calling or folding is 0. 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 Okay, so they have the same EV. Yes, it's calling with kings and queens. No, it doesn't really matter. They are the same hand for all practical purposes. All right, and if we go ahead and take a look at half pot, same thing. We're going to get a really high fold percentage. It's going to throw some people off. When we're betting half pot, we would expect normally a 33% fold. But of course, we're going to get a higher number than that because 4s, 5s, and 6s don't count. Okay. And against the half pot sizing choice now, kings and queens are capable of raising, but while they raise, they also they are indifferent between raising and calling, so they don't always raise. Okay, and keep in mind that these hands are going to lose the pot on occasion when they raise. That's the thing, is that these hands have a risk. So some people be like, well, half pot, like, isn't this range just like mostly jacks? It is mostly jacks. It's occasionally pocket aces. The issue, and it's occasionally pocket sevens. The issue is that when pocket kings or pocket queens raises, it's not just pocket jacks and it's not just pocket aces. It's also pocket sevens. When kings and queens, I'll just show you. When kings and queens raise here to 2x pot, there's a shoving range, and the shoving range is aces and pocket sevens. And when they get jammed on by pocket aces, it's not like they just lose to aces. They also concede some fraction of this pot to sevens, because of course when they get jammed on, their EV gets reduced to 0. You can take a quick look here. The EV of pocket kings. Ooh, it doesn't show me the EV here. What a nice magic trick on the part of the solver. That's okay. As you can see, it's both calling and folding. And so regardless of this glitch that's somewhat annoying when you're making a video, when you see both green and blue, you know that the EV is 0. Because if the EV was positive, it would call. And if the EV was negative, it would fold. So it's mixing, the EV is 0. And so sevens has in effect stolen some of the EV away from kings and queens. And the strategy is in effect like somewhat wary. Like you need to be somewhat wary at these deeper SPRs of like basically re-raise strategies. Something to just always keep in mind at deeper SPRs. The game's not over if you raise, and like there's a lot of chips left, so you can get re-raised. And if you can get re-raised, you can get, your opponent can have value, but they can also have bluffs. And so that's a component of the indifference here, is that like when you raise to 200, you are taking a risk that you get re-raised. And it wouldn't be a risk if your opponent only raised with pocket aces. That's what I'm trying to communicate. If your opponent only had pocket aces, it wouldn't matter if they raised or called. You would just lose, right? You would just lose the pot. The reason that it's an issue is because they have a re-raising range that's balanced with aces and sevens, right? It's a balanced re-raising range. And so you end up losing some of the pot that you would capture if you just called. Okay, so that calling and re-raising are actually somewhat competitive at these deeper SPRs. Whereas, for example, if you just had a 2-to-1 SPR and it wasn't 5-to-1, you weren't taking that risk of being jammed on by both pocket aces and by a range of pocket aces and bluffs, or aces in this case aces and sevens, you would probably be able to just jam for 2x pot with kings and queens. And because the consequences there, if the consequences ended there, that would be great, but they don't in this instance. And so this is really important to kind of keep track of that. Deeper SPRs mean being a little bit more careful in terms of the exposures that you take. And again, always just, the other thing is like always just that you get that reminder that betting like really small, or betting really small and taking a new risk. So betting really small and risking being jammed off the equity is oftentimes not a theoretically sound approach, right? So when you make a raise or a bet, you should be thinking about, is this bet worth the risk of being jammed on and essentially becoming indifferent or losing the pot? Because if you get jammed on and you don't have a hand that calls all the time because you don't beat your opponent's value bets or split with your opponent's value bets. If you have a hand that's rendered a bluff catcher, the EV gets reduced to 0, right? Doesn't matter if you call or fold, EV gets reduced to 0. So in effect, you've then lost the pot. And is this a risk worth taking? Well, if your opponent can't raise you, then it's not. It's a non-factor, right? But if your opponent, in a game where you're deeper and your opponents can raise you, you always have to make sure that the risk of betting is worth the reward of betting is worth the risk of being reduced to indifference. And so when you see, again, I'm going to keep kind of harping on this. When you see people who are in position betting 10% sizings or 30% sizings, it shows that they just lack awareness of that really core idea around no limit hold'em. So we're getting a little bit broader with some of this, and that's because I think it's important to explain like how these ideas affect real-time play. And in the beginning, we could just do the toy games and just do them for the sake of doing them. But obviously, like the more toy games we do, the more we want to make sure that we're really relating things, because you guys have a better understanding now of how things work. And so it's important that we relate everything back to play. So, okay, cool. Awesome. I will go ahead and take a look at the next part of this video now. All right, guys, now we're going to do in position versus bet strategy. So of course, out of position here, choosing just half pot, in spite of all of these advantages and all of the strength that's in this range. At this SPR, the out of position player only chooses half pot as the sizing choice. Again, that's something that's very different. That's runs somewhat counter to how a lot of people understand no limit. A lot of people think about no limit and they think like, oh, if we're deeper, we bet bigger. And it doesn't always work that way. So here, against an uncapped in position range, 5x SPR, where the nuts is a pretty decent part of their range, mathematically, 17%, 16.67% to be exact. We're now reduced to betting half pot as the out of position player, in spite of the advantages that we enjoy with kings and queens. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the in position player does versus this half pot bet. Now we are expecting 33% folding, 67% defending. Of course, that comes from 50 over 150, our bet divided by the total pot after our bet. So 50 over 150, 33% fold, 67% defend. We are actually expecting that because 4s, 5s, and 6s are below our opponents, our actual true bluffs that are below our opponents, the bottom of our opponent's range. So go ahead and we pull this off here. We get the 33% fold. Pretty clean. And in position is raising with pocket aces, still not jamming. Okay, it would be a fairly large jam, and the majority of the defending strategy would certainly be pocket aces if in position did jam here. So you can see here that aces forms the backbone of this call, and there's not much EV in the jam, like not much incremental EV in the jam that comes from kings or queens. And so if you make it just a little bit smaller, you get called by kings and queens more often, and that just turns out to be more lucrative than the alternative. And yeah, I mean, like, we're defending bluff catchers, and fold percentage is where we predicted. I think in the context of the education that you guys have around how these toy games work, at this point, this looks pretty clean. So go ahead and give it a wrap here for 5x pot and condensed in position with traps, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next set of toy games.